Hey folks, it's Marvin Cash, the host of The Articulate Fly. We're back with another Fly Lines Essential with Mac Brown. How you doing, Mac?
I'm doing great. How are you, Marvin?
I'm just trying not to melt. It's pretty damn hot down here in the flatlands.
Yeah, it got a little warm today. I think we got up about 85 here today, which was warm, but I feel pretty blessed considering what they showed on the news this morning all across the Midwest in the triple digits. I thought, well, we're pretty lucky.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this time we're going to take a dive into sinking lines, and I thought maybe you could kick it off, Mac, and just kind of talk about kind of how they're made.
Okay. Mainly the core is different, and usually it's a solid monocore. And so it's much thinner than a floating line or an intermediate line because the fly line then is basically tungsten powder that they mix in with the coating, PVC coating. And what that does is it enables you to build it, much, much thinner than, say, a floating line. It's probably, I hadn't mic'd it lately to see a DI5 compared to a floater or a DI7, but I would guess it's close to half the diameter, at least just from looking at it and feeling it in your hands.
Yeah. And the interesting thing too, we were talking before we started recording that, with that core, it really kind of helps to stretch those lines before you fish them, right?
Yeah, especially if it's cold, like cold weather in the winter. Because normally when we're throwing them, like on the lakes a lot in the winter for trout, it's usually in colder weather, and it really helps to or even stretch them out. Like as I'm pulling them off the reel, just stretch, then let it drop. Pull another 6 feet, pull it, stretch it, let it drop. Because a lot of times it wants to hold memory because of that solid monocore.
Yeah, got it. And you want to kind of, decipher kind of you said like DI5, you want to kind of walk people through kind of how manufacturers generally describe the sink rates?
Sure. We start off really intermediate would be first. And intermediate, there's a lot of different intermediates. So they're not all created equal. That some are designed to be like a 1/4 inch of sink rate a second. I know it sounds like, well, that's not much, but a lot of times we're throwing them over, say, a grass flat that's really shallow. We'd want to have one that sinks like really slow. See if you could throw it out and wait, 10, 15 seconds, start retrieving. And then there's other ones that are 1/2 inch to 1 inch. And usually glass lines, what we call glass lines for intermediate. And they're a little bit fatter, but they're still going to sink at a much slower rate. Then we move into basically the smaller the number, like a DI2, density, 3 line, 4 line. Those are going to sink a much slower rate than a higher number, like a 7, 8, 9 is going to sink, much quicker, like 5 to 8 inches a second. And for the higher the number. And so we choose those based on what is the layer we're trying to get to, and so that's kind of what makes up that decision. And I guess usually it's best to air up high before you go, far down. It's because fish would look up always before they're ever looking down below them.
Yeah, not to mention that usually you're using a little bit stouter tippet material and you get hung up and it's a little bit more work to get your stuff back.
That's right. And let's talk about that real quick too. The tippet, there's no tapered leaders or any of that. We're usually using 3X or 2X on these on for trout anyway, on lakes. That's usually what would use if we're fishing, deeper, and it'd be a much shorter, just a straight piece of 3X, 3 to 4 feet to the first fly. If you're running a single fly, if you're running, multiple flies, then it would be same thing. It'd just be straight 3X. You just daisy chain a dropper, put another 4 to 5 feet, daisy chain another dropper. It would work like that. But if we're throwing a single fly, like say on a river, like on a tailwater or something, we might be throwing a single, and then you could come down to 20 inches even. You could have it that close. So that makes it easy.
Yeah, it does. And, and one of the things too we were talking about is obviously, when you strip a kind of we'll just say traditional sinking line, it has a tendency to pull the line up from the bottom and then it sinks back down. So you kind of get a jigging presentation. But, kind of one of the great things that SA and other manufacturers have done is they've created these density compensated lines.
Right. And that helps a lot with keeping it horizontal on the retrieve, just helping bring it across at a horizontal level. there's a time we want them to stay horizontal. If it's depending on what trout species, that they say rainbow like to feed more in the horizontal, and I think that's true from the lake fishing that I've done over the years. And I would say brown trout tend to feed more in the vertical up down action. So if we were on Loch Leven in Scotland where it's all brown trout, then naturally we'd want a line that does go up and down. So it's just about understanding what it is you're, I guess, going after, But that's a big improvement, having density compensated.
Yeah, and then of course another improvement, we've talked about this before, is that the manufacturers now are color coding, right, the head versus the running line, which is really helpful when you're casting the line.
Oh yeah, okay, so you won't exceed what the head length is, and those are really nice. That's a really nice progression compared to when we were kids. It was always just the same color, so you just kind of had to look and be aware where it was fatter and where it got skinnier. And in the old days, we used to just take Sharpies and have to mark them up ourselves, and would look for the black lines coming in on the Sharpie, to know where that would be. But I think it's a big improvement to have them just a total color change, and you can just glance at it and instantly.
Yeah, absolutely. And at least for me, I don't fish a lot of sinking lines, and particularly I get frustrated when they're really, really heavy, because your fly is way down. You got to get everything back. You got to get the line back to the boat. Why don't you give folks maybe some tips for like how to cast these rigs with these sinking lines?
Okay. Yeah. Well, usually on the lakes, well, it's different on lakes and the river, really. But if we're on a lake, we're usually hanging it quite a bit of time after we retrieve it. And we usually wait up to 20, 30 seconds. When it's about 30 feet from the boat, in other words, the flies are still deep and we're hanging it, because what the assumption is, the fish probably followed it. If you threw out a big cast 85 feet, you probably had some follows that might not have eaten it yet. And then once it sits there and looks at it when it stops, a lot of times they'll eat it after 10, 20 seconds. And so we do the hang a lot. So then when we're ready to cast from the hang, we want to keep that amount of weight out there, because we don't want to bring it in short, of course, because then it's going to take longer to get it back out far. So we'll leave that same 30 feet out and do a pickup, just do a roll cast pickup forward, and that'll bring that weight up near the surface. And if it didn't do it all in the first pickup, just do another one until you see it all jump up and go. And as soon as it jumps up and goes, then go ahead and make your back cast, and you've got it back aerialized to let it go. But that does frustrate a lot of people, even on the rivers, because they try to pick it up and make a cast, but it's like sunk in concrete. You got to first bring it all up to the surface. And you do that by usually just giving a pickup, a roll cast pickup in front.
Yeah, and I guess that you don't necessarily have to, for lack of a better word, lay the line out like if you were casting a floating line. You're really just trying to get it up kind of in the top of the water column, so that you get a water load that actually lets you load the rod on the back cast, right?
Yeah, that's the trick, is just keeping it out. Because once I hang stuff, even on a river or a lake, when I hang it, because I hang it on the river a lot too when I'm retrieving. When I'm bringing it back towards the end, I'll start to, fish real slow, and I might hang it for a minute, then fish real slow, like doing a finger crawl with the line. But when I'm ready to cast it, I guess one of the biggest things over the years, just, on trips and teaching casting a lot, is people tend to bring it in too short. So just think of that. If you had 30 feet out and your leader's only 2 feet, like we said on a river, well, if you have that 30 foot out, you can go ahead, pick it up, and go ahead and bomb it back out really far, because you shoot line in back, shoot line in front, bam, you're back at 80 feet. But the big mistake is, just from sitting in boats guiding a lot over the years, is people bring it back in short. Now we're in trouble. If it comes back in, there's only 5, 6 feet of it out. Now we're going to waste time. We waste time. Now we're not efficient. Now we got a lot more time casting in the air. So that's what you're trying to break people of. It's just the habits of leaving enough mass out there where they can pick it up and let it rock and roll without wasting time false casting a bunch.
Yeah, and then we were talking too that a way to handle the fact that these lines they don't cast as well is to cast with an elliptical casting stroke.
Yeah, I think that helps a lot when I'm going to those higher ones, like the 7, 8, 9s. It usually works better for sure throwing those elliptical casts like off to the side and coming back over vertical. Yeah, it just helps to keep it still doesn't fix the problem of the big thing I'll say, I mean, the cast, yeah, elliptical is what I usually cast when I'm casting the heavier ones, but it's the line management of the line that's sitting in the boat. Or if you're wading, of course, then you're going to have some storage system. A lot of times I use my little finger, then my ring finger, then my middle finger. I'll put big coils on each finger. And then you can point your fingers when you're shooting forward. But it's the tangling of those higher density lines that's an issue. And so one thing that really helps if you're on a boat is just to lay a wet towel, put a wet towel up where you're standing and have that line as you strip it, sit on that wet towel. And that kind of helps it stick and helps it manage. I mean, because every fifth cast, even for a good caster, even coming off a wet towel, about every fifth or sixth cast, a lot of times you're going to start to see a tangle. Well, then you got to stop, and it's really tiny, like I said, and then you got this weighted line that's all in a big mess just because you shot it out, and of course it got a knot somehow. So you never see that with the glass lines or the floaters. I mean, you never have that happen, but that's the only drawback of fishing those higher densities is they have a lot of tendency to get, little tangles and stuff when you're shooting it out.
Yeah. And then I guess, the last wrinkle we really have is that, people can buy sink tips, right? Say you're predominantly fishing floating lines, but every now and again, there'll be like a deep pocket you want to fish, or you want to kind of swing deep across a bank, right? You can basically buy sink tips that kind of behave a lot like sinking lines. They're just not as long, right?
Yeah, exactly. A lot of them are set up where you can just loop to loop, the end of the line. Or if you have a lot of times I'll leave a perfection knot, a needle nail knot coming into the fly line, and that way the sink tip part has a loop already on it, so you can switch those out really quick. Just pull your leader off and put that on. You can actually leave the fly already rigged up on it, and then you get out of that type of water where you want to go back to your regular leader, just switch off the loop again and you're ready to go. But those are really advantageous. I have a kit. They make them a lot for spey casting and Skagit, two-handed casting, but they also make a lot of good ones, for single. But I like having them. I think the arrangement that I carry usually is like 6, 8, 10, 12, and those are in different grains of weight, so they'll sink bigger, like the 12-footer is heavier, and it'll take a fly down deep in like a bigger, deeper hole. And I think those are really handy. I leave them in the boat a lot when I'm working, and I'll switch off like that a lot on different pools on the river if we're floating. And a lot of times that makes all the difference, just to get it down where it needs to be.
Yeah, and it's certainly cheaper than buying a bunch of lines. I think, kind of the one knock on that system is if you find yourself fishing them a lot, you're going to probably get really tired of the way they hinge on your fly line.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, they do a little bit hinge, but for what they get done for what I like about them is you don't have to deal with tungsten or brass or glass or any of that. You can make those connection changes quick and just put some small, wets. You could put 2 or 3 wets still off that same arrangement, and your wets are down, further down. Then as the hatch progresses, you can come up lighter until you're back up to just a leader with them back up near the surface, but usually that's how most hatches progress in the spring. You want to have them deeper, and then you work them up as the fish get real active up near the surface.
Yep.
But yeah, I don't think a lot of people fish the hinges like we're talking about, putting those different tips on. They're just sink tips. They have a sink tip wallet. I'm sure they still make it. I've had them for years. SA's made them for over 30 years. I've used theirs. They work great.
Yeah. And you're feeling super generous too. I'll talk about our normal question gathering and promotions and drawing stuff, but you have a special offer, for lack of a better word, you wanted to share with folks.
Oh yeah. Let's talk about who brought the elliptical cast to North America. Whoever answers that, let's do it. One of the fly line giveaways for that. Like, who brought the elliptical cast to North America, and whoever answers that correctly, then we'll see the questions and answers come in, and then whatever the first one is, Marvin, let's go ahead and let them pick a fly line.
Yeah. And so, folks, get that in sooner rather than later. And the way it'll work is you can either email it to me or Mac, or you can hit us up on our Instagram channels, DM us, and the first person in with the right answer, we'll set you up with a new SA fly line. And speaking of SA, want to thank them for their generous support of the series. And folks, remember, we're collecting questions, and the last episode that we're going to do is going to be a Q&A episode. But the way it works is send us your questions. You can email them to us or send them to us on social media. And if we'll collect your questions, and everyone that sends a question in is going to get in a drawing for a signed copy of Mac's book, Casting Angles. And then if we pick your question for the Q&A episode, we're going to enter you in a drawing for some essay lines of your choice. So, thanks to the folks at SA. I think it's super generous of them. So folks, send us your questions, and because if you don't play, you can't win. And remember, next time we're going to talk about shooting lines, and I think the episode after that is going to be line care and maintenance, and then we're going to have our Q&A episode. And it's pretty hot out there. If you can't fish for trout, you ought to go maybe catch some bass or panfish, and you owe it to yourself to get out there and catch a few. Tight lines, everybody. Tight lines, Mac.
Tight lines, Marvin.